Hey y'all, this is your favorite nerdy girl here, Nerdygirlreviews, aka Ross Banner, and we are back with another recap for Queen Charlotte, a Bridgeton story, currently streaming on Netflix. If you'd like to see and hear the full commentary, keep me locked here on YouTube. If you're watching this on Instagram, click the link in bio. If you're watching this on IG Stories, click on the link. It'll link you back to my YouTube channel. I'm also available on TikTok under Nerdygirlreviews. And let's get into all of this regal beauty recap for this season. Be right back, y'all. XOXO, Nerdy Girl. Now, if I look semi-familiar, I want to say I'm missing gloves, but I want to say I'm trying to keep in the spirit of this Lady Danbury. And I was very impressed with her season 1. She is played by Ajoa Ando. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I am fascinated by that actress. Also, I want to explain why the visuals look a little funny. I'm working with a new camera for space. So, unfortunately, you will probably see the mirror image of my Nerdy Girl Reviews background and the letters on my little trusty tablet. But until I can get all that fixed, work with me, y'all. Nonetheless, we jump into this season's Bridgerton. And though a lot of us are under the impression that this is season 3, it really isn't. I think it's its own spin-off that they've kind of brilliantly sandwiched in before the premiere. Or I think this is like how they've done with the show You, that they started off with a couple of episodes and then they come back months later with the second half. So, but I feel like it's our introduction into these characters that are familiar and not so familiar. We are introduced to the background of our Queen Charlotte, and brilliantly played by Golda Roshov. Please forgive me, you know me in names, but she plays an older, mature Queen Charlotte. And her backstory, her love story that we weren't familiar with. And trust me when I say that people will, I know historians have already been like, well, the show is largely fantastic fantasy. It's not really meant to be taken literal. And Queen Charlotte did exist. She is a real person. Her ambiguity in terms of her race is what people have always kind of gone back and forth with. Just going based on her background, I believe she was a German princess, and her personal life was negotiated by her only living sibling, because I believe her parents perished when she was still young. So from what we gather and from history books and even in the show, when the elder parent, usually these business dealings and they were business transactions, were dealt by the father. And when the father went missing, most of the reins went to the eldest sibling, if male. Sometimes the mother would intervene. But that's a lot of pressure for, somebody so young, and having to basically, for the benefit of the family or the benefit of herself as a female to survive. Because remember, women weren't encouraged to work. So you had to marry to live, to survive. And from what we gather in the series, they're both relatively young. I believe she was maybe 15 or something like that when they negotiated her personal life and marriage to to King George. We'll get into what that led to, unfortunately, or its unfortunate outcome in a little bit. But according to Smithsonian Magazine, and I will link anything that I mention in the description box, this is an article, and how sometimes, yes, the series, Miss Shonda Rhimes, Shondaland, does take sometimes some creative license that can blur the lines in reality. But there are portraits of the actual Queen Charlotte where there's ambiguity. She's very fair. But from what I gather, and even there is some published cartoons, I believe there were like political cartoons of its day where she is depicted as a person of color. And that she isn't so, she isn't so fair. And because of certain features, like her nose was like a minuscule larger than what is considered ideal, then she was a person of color and perhaps not to be seen or be respected. But in the series, she is. There is no question of that. Nobody is questioning her appearance. Although I will say her mother-in-law, which I think did play true into how reality was. And I believe her mother-in-law, King George's mom, was a princess, but she was particular about her appearance, about Queen Charlotte's appearance, and I believe that they did stay true to that story, and how even the way they would depict her in portraits, that even though she was very proud of her skin tone, of her melanin, her mother-in-law would insist and for her to be lighter. Her ethnicity was not to be questioned. Also, I want to state that the colors that I'm using also are very inspired by the hues that are used in the show, even down to my eyeshadow. Remember, I always say I'm always big on promoting brands and products from the Dollar Tree. And tonight's eyeshadow palette is the Flesh palette, as you can see here. So there's some purple popping in my eyeshadow, but they have really beautiful hues. I love this palette. And honestly, for the price, you cannot beat. I know I went on a tangent, but nonetheless, if you do come across Flesh, it's Flesh. I know it's turned opposite, but Flesh is the palette. Be sure to pick it up. Nonetheless, so yes, according to Smithsonian Magazine, Black Britons in Bridgeton, like its sister show, Queen Charlotte takes substantial liberties with the historical record portraying Charlotte as a Black woman whose marriage opened doors for people of color in the 18th century England. In truth, most historians reject the theory that Charlotte was Black. I don't know how. There are portraits that she does look, that she could be mixed or has Black heritage in her bloodline. Anyway, we were two separate societies divided by color until a king fell in love with one of us. The new series expands on the imagined movement toward racial equality, explaining that George's mother, Princess Augusta, hastily bestowed titles upon wealthy Black families in order to remake the nobility in her new daughter-in-law's image, like I mentioned. As Alison Herman writes for Variety, dubbed the Great Experiment, the integration attempt isn't immediately successful. There's some resistance from the old guard, though it's never explicitly racist, again begging some follow-ups about the pre-existing status quo. Racial relations in Georgian England were far more complicated than Bridgerton and Queen Charlotte suggests. According to historic England, around 15,000 Black people lived in the country during the second half of the 18th century. The majority of these individuals worked in the domestic service as either paid or enslaved servants. Through Britain abolished though Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807, in no small part due to the efforts of Black, um, like, okay, it goes into further detail. But nonetheless, I know it takes its liberties. We all know it takes its liberties, but why not? You know, we are to believe about, you know, superheroes and people that can make spider webs appear from their, you know, palms. You know, Batman, you know, with his cape and can fly. And, you know, we have all these fantastic characters, and no shade of Marvel. I love Marvel, and we are very much anticipating the live action version of The Little Mermaid. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But I believe it drops May 26th. Why not? And I love how they presented our Queen Charlotte. Queen Charlotte here is played by a very young and precocious, beautiful actress, India Ria Armafetio. She plays our young Queen Charlotte, and our King George, our older King George, is James Fleet, King George III, and our young, gorgeous King George, played by Corey Mike Trees. Oh Lord, please forgive me, but I don't know if I'm pronouncing that at all. Google it, y'all. Not for nothing, he reminds me of like a young Tom Cruise. And this is his first, like, proper, like he has said in interviews, proper gig, proper acting role. How is this your first? He was amazing. It's only 6 episodes. And we see how they're introduced. They actually introduced on their wedding day, and that was true to historical record. And that she was very curious about knowing who she was going to marry, and people were always avoiding the questions and trying to kind of gaslight her into thinking everything's okay. And so I believe there was an attempt for her to escape, and so he helped her down. Was she so reluctant? I believe in historical records she wasn't. The actual Queen Charlotte, there was resistance in the show. Somehow she's charmed by him, and who wouldn't? He's beautiful. And but there's a problem from the very beginning, because they seem like they're hitting it off and that they are to do their marital duties, consummate the relationship. And he takes her to what is supposed to be her living quarters, Q. This beautiful castle, beautiful building, all for herself. As he is whisked away. No, I'm sorry. He lived in Kew, and Queen Charlotte was to live in Buckingham Palace, the Buckingham Palace. And she's perplexed, like, and then, which is so funny because the way he went about charming her, he was just like, you know, you don't have to call me king. Don't address me as king. I'm just George. But then when she presses him about, like, but we are to consummate, you are my husband now, you know, what's going on? And he shows his aggression. Then she realizes, oh, no, I stand corrected. You are my king. So she kind of bows down, just letting him know, like, well, she's upset. And I guess we have that kind of relationship. And they are to be together. I believe she was picked by his mother, Princess Augusta. And in 1761, age 17, I thought she was 15, Charlotte found herself chosen by George III as his bride. She had good royal and Protestant credentials. Most important for the king, she was sweet-natured and compliant. Charlotte also had most agreeable attitude without being ravishingly beautiful. These are things that you can Google. It's like, okay. But I feel like there was politics involved and he needed somebody who was just kind of going to yes him. And that's what it was. Though she held her own, she was no wallflower from what I gather. And she would be one of the queens to have firsts of everything. I mean, it's presumed that she was, the first queen to be a person of color. She had 15 children, so that was a love affair for her to have so many. But yes, the show takes liberties in terms of her adorning her real hair and wearing her crown nestled in her real curls, her real coil curls. Which, by the way, also, I want to make mention my little homemade crown. I'm very proud of it. It's like, I can't believe I even created this, but I will also link that video below. And I'm still contemplating the reason why I did it initially, which was perfect timing because we just had the coronation of King Charles now. About like a week ago, he just had the coronation. It was official, and now he has his queen, his wife, Camilla. Although we all think of Princess Di, I'm just saying. It should have been Queen Di, Lady Di. But anyway, and I'm still contemplating on reviewing The Crown, but nonetheless. So I hope you enjoy the aesthetics and my flowers and whatnot, because we are celebrating Mother's Day weekend. And so, yeah, and her having 15 kids, none of them were at this point in the show were successful in giving her an heir. 15 kids, and some of them, unfortunately, though, she could have been a little more on the sympathetic side, since a lot of her children were to conceive, but some of their children perished. You were lucky if your child at that point in time were to survive and live into adulthood. She did have 15, but I believe 2 of them died. One died very young, and I think still a child, maybe like 6 years old. And there was another child, a female child, that died. I believe it was the youngest. It died at 26. But nonetheless, she's pressing her children. She knows that she's getting on with life, and she needs an heir. And we almost see how things kind of mirror each other, because even though in contemporary time of what's considered contemporary in the show, she's pressing for these children of hers to give her an heir, much like her mother-in-law did when she was recently married to King George. And for it to be a successful quote-unquote experiment, there needed to be an heir. They needed to conceive. And at the time, nobody was giving her any kind of indications of why he was so adamant in being in one palace and her to live her life in her own palace and not see each other. And so then we later discovered that the reason that he had been so aggressive in terms of his supposed privacy. Yes, he had a fascination with astrology. It wasn't because he was a nerd or antisocial or socially awkward. He was suffering from some form of mental illness. And before, there weren't proper terms for it. You just assumed the person was off their rocker, kooky. He had tremors. I think psychologists have analyzed over the years what he could have suffered from, and I believe that they considered it some form of bipolar disease. And there isn't any actual proof of him going through some form of treatment, but there are record of how sometimes mental institutions, which I don't know if they call them that, they probably call them asylums or whatnot, how they would treat manic people. And I'm sure that there were different methods that they were trying to exhaust so that she wouldn't, the Queen Charlotte, would be exposed to his manic episodes. And at first, I'm sure he had it under control somehow, but with the loss of his youngest child at 26 years of age, I believe she died of tuberculosis, it sent him over the edge, and the manic um, episodes were more frequent to the point where he just lost all sense of reality. And it's sad. But you see the love affair, you see how they became close and how he's able to charm her. And it's just this beautiful blossoming of, of their love blooming. Very much in spring, blooming like flowers. But the difference here is that, and I know a lot of people are like, well, thank you. Finally, we're getting back to the sexy portion of Bridgerton, because we didn't really experience that with season 2. There were instances, but I feel because unfortunately they were caught between the crossfires of COVID and protocol. So it wasn't as sexy as it could have been. But also something about the story was a little off. This season was very reminiscent to season 1. It was sexy, not super raunchy, and I think it fulfilled whatever the audience was kind of missing. And let's just be honest, this has always been known about these shows. I hate when people are like, well, if you want to see, that much sex, see a porno. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's always great when they integrate it into the fantasy of TV magic. And don't be so judgmental, because I'm sorry, it is our escape. That's why, right? Those Daniel Steele novels took off, right? Or 50 Shades of Grey took off. It's people sometimes, like a little spice in their fantasy. Don't judge us. Especially when one of our leading characters looks like a young Tom Cruise. Okay. Cocktails. Hello. Anyway, and we get some backstory on Lady Danbury, which I already loved her in season 1, and how she became basically a surrogate mother to the Duke in season 1. And now we see a backstory of who she was and how she came to become Lady Danbury, and how she was able to come into her own sense of wealth and self-worth. Because she was also promised to a much older man at a very young age, and something that she didn't necessarily want to do, but it was something that it was just part of your responsibility at that time, to feed the family, to maintain a name and stature. And she became well accustomed, even though she had to deal with him and having to do things that she didn't want to do. He's a much older man, and she just wanted to get him out of her way. But she was still loving to him. She got accustomed to his likes, because they had trained her at a very young age to, he likes this, you need to do this. And although we're talking about something that happened in the 1700s, tell me it doesn't mimic how women's rights are being slowly omitted and taken out into with our legislation and the way that things are moving in this country. Unfortunately, it's kind of mimicking things from what seems like eons ago could happen literally next week. We don't know. So it's far removed, but not really, and it makes you pensive, and it makes you think about that, the possibility of something like that happening, and it being just torturous, because being stripped of your rights. And it's so funny, because it's almost like she has some form of Stockholm syndrome, because when she loses her husband, although that's what she's been wanting, our Lady Danbury loses her husband. He has like a stroke or a heart attack. He passes. And for the first time, she's baffled, because she's never indulged the idea of what she likes, who she is, separate from him. And she finds herself still doing things because that's how she was raised, to his likings. And then when she finds herself in a very passionate affair, which is looked upon horribly on a woman. You are not to engage in sexual activity for your own pleasure, but for his pleasure, for reproduction. She finds herself very much involved with a married man, who then we see the connection. It turns out to be the father of Lady Violet Bridgerton. So there was a connection between Miss Lady Danbury and Violet Bridgerton from back in the day. She got hooked up with her father. They have a very passionate affair that doesn't really go too far, but she comes into her own as a woman. She takes control of the reins of her own sexual pleasure, because up until that point, she was just kind of like lying there like fish, because it's not a man that she was necessarily attracted to. Her now deceased husband, of which she became a widow. And then also how everything kind of falls on her too. Will she maintain her status? Did he leave anything in some form of testament? She scrambles, and she has a child with him. So he is to become now the man of the house. And so for her to kind of maintain her stature, she has to play ball. She has to either win the likes of Queen Charlotte, which they have this beautiful blossoming friendship. She kind of lets it be known, like, you need to own your queendom here, your queen status, because her first inclination when she's having issues and hiccups with King George is to run. But Lady Danbury kind of like, hey, you need to chill, and there's so much that you could take advantage here. You are the first of our kind, so please don't be that person and run away. Come into your own. And in that, their friendship blossoms. Although somehow she is able to speak to the princess, who can also help her with that circumstance of keeping her title. But it's always for an exchange of something, and she wanted information and wanted to know, because up until this point, she was able to keep in communication with her son. But then when she was having friction with her daughter-in-law, she was being kept at bay. And she needed that dirt. She needed to know that she would conceive soon, so the experiment is successful. So she is. I mean, at first, Lady Danbury kind of feels sideways about it, but somehow she works it in her favor and not double-crossing her friend. So that's why when you fast forward to what is considered contemporary, they're such good friends. They talk because they've been friends since forever. Again, Lady Danbury does not exist. There's no historical record of her. But when you get wrapped up in these shows, you kind of wish, and you kind of secretly think, like, there had to be somebody like that. And how she would, raise the Duke and everything. I want to see, there needs to be more backstory on Lady Danbury and how do that, because we have a brief introduction of it in season 1, but we need to see more information. What happened to her son, too? And so from what I gathered, there will be a season 2. So I hope that they are able to put all those little interesting gems that we so desire to know about this particular story. And also the love story between their, like, handyman. Like, not handyman in the sense of, like, cleaning or getting, the tools ready. These are people that are there to serve you. So kind of like a servant boy, I guess, right? So, and they are to assist the queen or king till their last breath. That is their purpose. And so for the queen, we have playing the young Brimsley as Sam Clement. Really, really adorable actor. And his love interest, which I'm not seeing here. I don't know what his... Hold on a second. And Reynolds, who assists the king. And so while they're battling it out, getting into it a lot as a couple, they try to intervene, but in their own way. Reynolds sees the mental breakdown of the king, which I believe then he was best known as the Mad King. Now, I don't know if necessarily his spells were documented, probably. But he definitely was there to support him and pull in the reins. I'm sure a lot of it was fabricated, but again, who's to say? And Brimsley was the one always trying his best to settle the queen and calm her from her fears, and always trying to escape. So every time that they would, at first they had like an agreement. They would just, get it on, so she get pregnant. They'd obviously be standing guard outside, but they have like this connection, and it's the cutest thing in the world. Really, and that in itself I thought was very, what's the word? Was very tender. It was very tender. It wasn't like this raunch. It wasn't like super sexy. I mean, we were getting it from the couple, a king and the queen, but they had these moments that were so soft and tender, and stolen kisses, and they were able to be together for X amount of minutes. But you could see that their love affair was genuine, and always just like a little glimmer, a little glance, a little hand touching away. And how they're able to maintain that relationship and protect both the king and the queen separately was something. I love that. And we don't know what happens towards the end. That's the thing too, because towards the end, they don't tell us what happens to Reynolds. Brimsley, we see, grows old. And there's a moment where he's in the garden, perhaps reminiscing on those stolen moments, those quiet in the dark moments when they would enjoy each other's company, just enjoying each other's company, just dancing in a very romantic way. And you can see him, reminiscing in the garden where he's caught by surprise, and then is very livid because he didn't want anybody seeing him do that. But remembering that time, remembering that love affair, and it's kind of heartbreaking because you don't know. You're just to assume. I think I've read articles where they said that they had shot scenes with an older Reynolds, but they scrapped it, I believe, for maybe story purposes or story arc purposes, which makes it more intriguing. That's why we're all kind of thirsty for more information. What happened between those two? Did he perish? Did Reynolds perish at a young age? Which would make it so much sadder. But what an interesting season. So much better. Sorry, than season 2. I could barely kind of sit through season 2. I just kind of wanted to fast forward to the hot, steamy scenes, and there weren't that many. But again, I will say, can't judge, because it could have been correlated and connected to COVID, which was hard to shoot during that time. Shoot anything, TV shows and movies. And I think it still is, but I think it's just, not such a problem. Nonetheless, and then also we have, of course, the soundtrack, the score. We have songs, contemporary songs, but put to an orchestra. Very elegant symphony version. There is definitely, I recognize it. I mean, they put a lot of Taylor Swift and stuff like that, but I knew it was. I'm such a music geek. So when I heard certain notes, I said, oh man, that is Alicia Keys. If I Ain't Got You. It was so beautiful. They do make it relatable for younger generations to relate. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. They could just put that type of music of that time, and it would be still very much enveloped in the story. But it was gorgeous. And I'm curious because I believe they are going to come back with another set of episodes where we'll go back to the Bridgeton family. I think one of the brothers may be courting or start to court our gossip queen in the show. Oops. Lady Whistledown. Basically the Wendy Williams of her day, which I'm sure didn't exist. But again, it's fantasy, but it'll still reveal historical artifacts, facts, and actual characters through fantasy, right? Which I believe the real, not that she ever existed, but in the show, the real Lady Whistledown is Penelope Featherington, who's just, your average debutante, and but is in the know of all the gossip because she's always at these, fancy events. And yeah, so I believe one of the brothers from the Bridgeton family will be courting her, and there have been instances and clues of what might happen. But I will say that I didn't know this until much later too, and seeing other interviews and whatnot, that the King George, the Mad King, like they've advertised, or historians have made mention. I didn't know Jonathan Groff. That's the king that he is playing. So if you watch or have seen on Disney Plus or have seen in person, the character that plays that king in Hamilton is that King George, because in his madness, I believe, and he was able to, I believe, do a decent job, but I think he loses the United States, or their grasp of the United States. They still had ownership of a number of other countries, Canada and Australia, but they lost a grip on the United States because of him. And I don't know if it was because of his mental state or it was just something that just slipped out of his hands. So just a little piece of trivia in case you're ever doing Trivial Pursuits. Now you know. I didn't know. I was like, it's that King George, huh? And that kind of now explains why Jonathan played him the way he did on Broadway, because when I saw it on Disney Plus, I said, why is he spitting? Why is there so much spit? And although it is funny, it makes sense now, like, it comes all together. Anyway, I loved it. I recommended it 6 episodes. I think it was just a beautiful display of melanin. That's the draw for me, definitely, for this show, just to see so many people of color and playing these roles that typically wouldn't go to them. So I'll live in that fantasy all day. I don't care if it's real or not. We've seen how many characters for Marvel that don't exist and we love, and they're beloved. So yes, I do recommend it. 6 episodes on Netflix. I want to review a number of other shows that are coming. I just saw The Bear on Hulu. Loved. And I'm so glad that I waited till now, because season 2 will premiere in mid-June. So I'm all caught up. Wow, that's another marvel of a show, which I'm going to figure out how I do that review. And Euphoria, like I've mentioned, The Little Mermaid, the live action version will, I believe, premiere in theaters May 26th, but we'll see when it'll drop on Disney Plus. So many great films that are coming out too. I also got wrapped up in watching Succession, and I have to actually watch the latest episode because it just dropped too. And I love that show. So many great shows, y'all. But I just reviewed The Mother, and I will link it somewhere here so you can see that last review. And I hope you you enjoyed this review. Give me a like if you did. Have you seen Bridgeton? Is there anything that you liked, disliked? Let's have a little convo in the description box below. And yeah, the from the music to the costumes to the makeup to the crowns to the beautiful hair, the wigs that incorporated natural hair. That's such a plus and such a first for any show, especially for Netflix. But yes, if you like what you see, hit the subscription button and the notification button so you can be alerted to my next DIY haul and review. And until next time, y'all. Also, FYI, I'm thinking about maybe perhaps opening a Patreon. You guys let me know if you would be interested and if you would like to donate to this channel. I do want to see if I can expand it, and also that's why the video is a little longer. I don't have to chop it up so much because I was having camera issues, but this is still kind of like a band-aid until I can get better equipment. Nonetheless, let's play this out. This gorgeousness, Alicia Keys, and how it was accompanied by a whole orchestra symphony. Woo. It's just, you just get so enveloped in this story, and the music is just really the cherry on the cake on top.
Some people live for the fortune. Some people live just for
and happy Mother's Day, y'all. We are still celebrating Mother's Day, so to all my beautiful mommies.
For the power, yeah. Some people live just to play the game. Some